It's the holidays, a time to appreciate all the goodness around us. A time to focus on all the positive people and places that make Colorado such a wonderful place to live. For instance, two Colorado Symphony musicians who put on a show for some young people who love music but don't often get to enjoy it like this. Did you know the National Western Stock Show showcases some of the greatest Western artwork in the country? We'll take you there. Speaking of art, Irish descendants in Colorado built a statue to honor their ancestors who came to work in the mines and build a path to the future. Much like the braceros who came to work in the fields, many stayed and are responsible for the rich Mexican-American culture that we see today. Colorado is full of history, from stained glass windows that tell old stories to a Pulitzer Prize-winning picture shot by a longtime newspaper photographer in Denver and Colorado Springs. Yes, it's the season to appreciate all the good around us and take another look at some of the stories that are positively Colorado. Hello everyone, I'm Gary Shapiro. We're at the Chris Kindle Market in Civic Center Park, where the spirit of Christmas is all around us. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to revisit some stories that remind all of us how lucky we are to live in Colorado. We start by meeting an artist and his wife, working hard to preserve history through stained glass. And we'll head up to Greeley for an exhibit that shows us that history is often bittersweet. At the Colorado State Capitol, the historic stained glass windows tell stories. Stories about famous events and people, like David Moffett, a Colorado pioneer and business leader. The Senate chambers feature stories told through colorful artwork illuminated by the sun. Many of these windows were recently restored by an artist who knows a thing or two about history.
I really get nervous when I work on stuff like this because it's so fragile and it's almost irreplaceable.
In a nondescript building in Englewood, Phil Watkins carries on a family tradition that dates back to England in the 1760s. He's an eighth-generation stained glass artist who designs and builds new windows and fixes old ones.
You can't really hurry. Everything takes time.
Phil pieces together this broken window like a jigsaw puzzle. He'll replace damaged glass from his extensive stockpile, some made by famous glass makers around the world and collected by his father and grandfather. He puts lead between the pieces, then will solder the joints and use special cement to hold it all together.
It's a 1920s putty bucket back in the day.
As you can tell, his cement bucket is also pretty old. It's kind of a theme around this place. This window features circles of glass that tell 3 stories. When Phil gets it all done, it'll go back to the chapel on the DU campus. The image is restored, and the damaged 150-year-old window is good as new. Phil's wife, Jane, runs the business side of their studio.
We're very proud to save the windows, but we feel we're also saving Colorado history.
Watkins stained glass reflects that history. It's a museum of tools used by glass makers for decades. It's an art gallery featuring Phil's many creations. It's a scrapbook with all the newspaper and magazine articles about the Watkins family hanging on a wall. But more than anything, it is a place where historic stories in glass are passed on to future generations. It's bittersweet. For years, Mexican workers have come to Colorado to pick sugar beets and other crops. Under one government-sponsored program, millions came to the U.S. to replace American farm workers who left to fight during World War II. They worked long hours in the fields for little money, with barely a roof over their heads. They were the braceros, Spanish for manual laborer.
So at that time, they had one vision in mind, USA. Go up there, work, make some money, come back, go back, do it again.
Estela Nunez Franco's father was a bracero, and his story and the stories of others like him is now being told at the Greeley History Museum in an exhibit called The Bittersweet Harvest, the Bracero program.
I was shocked. I had no idea that he was part of history, and to him it was just work that he did when he was young.
It started with an executive order in 1942. The workers came to the U.S. from Mexico on short-term work contracts. Despite their important legal work, they faced discrimination. Many were sprayed with the insecticide DDT when they arrived. They were called derogatory names, and they were forced to apply for a U.S. ID card. They arrived with only a few pieces of clothing and often had to buy their own hats and gloves at inflated prices at local stores. These are the clothes worn by one bracero, Adriana Trujillo's grandfather.
He went through, discrimination and racism all his life, and he didn't talk about the bitter part. He was very positive, and that's the sweet part.
Thus the exhibit title, Bittersweet Harvest. They often faced horrible treatment. Still, they did the work. They grew the food, and their families tell us they loved what they were doing.
The Mexican American community has contributed to this area in so many ways that we're not aware of, and not just in the fields, but in academia and the arts and in other domains.
Dr. Jeannie Canales is part of a group trying to educate Coloradans about the influence of Mexican Americans in the area. This exhibit is part of that mission. The Bracero program continued after the war until 1964. And that's when hundreds of braceros began moving to Colorado, becoming U.S. citizens, and giving so much back to their communities. Bittersweet, for sure. Coming up after the break, we'll share one of the best-kept secrets in town that is attended by some of the best artists in America. And we'll take you to a concert like no other that is attended by some of the best kids you'll ever meet. Tucked in a corner of Expo Hall at the National Western is a collection of color, tradition, ingenuity, and love of Western art. Western art. It can be a lot of things, oil and watercolor paintings for sure, but also sculpture, bronze, clay, even furniture. It can be cowboys, but also landscapes and horses and cows and buffalo. This is a curated collection with the artist handpicked by artist, writer, and marketing specialist Rose Frederick.
I ask an artist to be in the show because they're doing work that makes sense in the show. They're doing work that my audience really loves, and they have something important to contribute to the genre of Western art in America today.
Western art can be something you never imagined. Strikingly colorful flowers, skulls, and bones, or the simple beauty of a stream meandering through a snow-covered forest. The artists who did these wonderful pieces, by the way, are not your typical Western artists, if there is such a thing. Kwang Ho and Adrienne Stein are married with a beautiful little boy, Liam. Kwang immigrated to Denver after escaping from Vietnam during the war. He was 12.
Didn't know any English at all, and I just drew in class all day while my classmates had to sit around and do real homework. So I got better and better at it until I won all the art competitions citywide in Denver. Every competition I entered, I won. The painting is really about the light.
Since then, Kwang's work has been featured in galleries and shows all over the country. He paints, he teaches art. It's his job and his passion. He says art is a combination of light, color, and detail, working like movements in a symphony to create a finale.
The more I walk around, I see more and more of the details and how beautiful and subtle everything is. And this little shaft of light that came in and lit, just touching the sides of everything as it raked across the landscape.
Adrienne's paintings are a little bit different kind of Western art. She's from Pennsylvania and didn't discover the West until she met Kwang.
To be a part of this show and to, create paintings that are influenced by the iconography of the West, the colors of the West, the forms of the West, the flowers of the West, that was all like a really new challenge for me.
A challenge she successfully overcame, by the way. Adrienne won the Artist Choice Award, as voted by her peers at this year's show. All of the artists here hold a special place in their heart and soul for life in the West.
I want people to come in and I want them to hear the different voices, but I also want them to feel really proud of the West and really proud of the stock show.
Western art at its best. They usually perform with the Colorado Symphony. Today, Catherine and Sophia's audience are workers from art thrift stores, young people with intellectual and developmental disabilities.
Like Down syndrome, like autism, like cerebral palsy.
Lloyd Lewis is CEO of Art Thrift Stores.
So it gives them a real sense of purpose and mission. Just like the rest of us, we like to contribute and give back, and they are no different than anyone else.
This sensory-friendly concert was Catherine Beeson's idea. Not only is she the assistant principal violinist with the symphony, she has her own group called Ensemble Faux Show.
All music is a song or a dance, I like to say, and to have to sit still and be perfectly quiet in the dark for, 2.5 hours, sometimes it's just a little much. You know, you want to burst out.
Crazy, let's hear your best crazy cat noise. All right.
This is a special day for these ARC employees. Events like this are just part of why they love their jobs. Seth Weshnak has worked at ARC for 11 years.
It's a place where people with disabilities don't get judged based on our differences. We don't consider it as being disabled. We consider it as just being different.
Seth called it a jam. One definition of jam is when someone behaves in a playful way. For both performers and audience, this was definitely a jam. Oh, and just to make it even more special, after the show, Catherine played with a young musician from the audience, Alfonso.
Nice.
A little jam session, you might say.
You know any polkas? I mean, you might have tapped me out, man. I think you know more music than I do.
Welcome back. There's an art installation in Leadville that is dedicated to those who led the way for Irish Coloradans today. It is positively Colorado. At a cemetery in Leadville, under blue skies and evergreen trees standing guard, 1,300 Irish immigrants are buried. For more than a century, their graves unmarked, their names unknown until recently.
And what this was an area for anybody who was Catholic who could not afford the $15 grave. And so they would be buried for free.
Kathleen Fitzsimmons is the Leadville historian. She worked with a CU professor, an Irish advocacy group, and others to identify the graves, researching church records to give names to the nameless. The names were then recorded by volunteers in Ireland as a tribute to the lives lost.
William Abbott, 31 years old. Infant Deegan, stillborn.
Most of the people came from one town in Ireland, driven away by famine and the closure of a mine. They ended up high in the Rockies in cold, harsh conditions, and sadly, it led to the early death of the men who worked, the women who came with them, and many of their children.
It was a super dangerous place to be a child, to have a baby, and trying to combat sickness or illness or injury up at 10,000 feet. With no health care, for a lot of them was a death sentence.
James Daly, 60 years old.
Leo Dalton, 1 year old.
I sit here as an educated woman because I stand on the shoulders of people who suffered and struggled immensely, from my father all the way back.
Lisa Switzer is the president of Irish Network Colorado, a group that raised hundreds of thousands of dollars to build this statue at the cemetery. The Irish Miners Memorial is the work of an Irish sculptor, a life-size miner next to a quartzite rock, kneeling atop a winding pathway overlooking the pauper cemetery. He's surrounded by artifacts from the mines: a shovel, a cup, a tin can.
He's on a bended knee, holding a miner's pick on one hand, and then his hand rests on a harp with Celtic knotwork on it. And the harp is the national symbol of Ireland, which is just beautiful.
Patrick Callahan, 24 years old.
Infant Campbell, 1 day old.
People gave willingly because they saw something of themselves in the story. And that's something much more articulate than I could ever be.
It's a century-old story, finally told through this beautiful monument, under blue skies and evergreen trees standing guard. We hope you've enjoyed our look back at stories that are positively Colorado. And we hope you, your family, and friends have the most wonderful holiday possible. We close with a look at a historical event from 60 years ago that affected not only Colorado, but the entire world. And we'll meet a photographer from Manitou Springs who was right in the middle of it. Thanks for joining us.
We were busy working those days, not really stopping to think about the magnitude of what happened. It was a job that I loved, and we were just fired up to do a good job that weekend with this gigantic event.
Although the president is running behind schedule, he pauses momentarily to shake a few hands.
There may be no better feeling for a news photographer than doing a good job on a story. Bob Jackson knows all about that. 29 years old, working for the Dallas Times-Herald. He was at the airport to take pictures of President and Jackie Kennedy greeting the crowd in Dallas. When the president's motorcade made its way through the city, Jackson was with other photographers 7 cars behind Kennedy's. He had just taken the film out of his camera to hand it off to a reporter. His camera was empty.
That's when we heard the first shot.
But apparently something is wrong here. Something is terribly wrong.
And then 2 more shots closer together.
Jackson knew immediately the shots came from the book depository building in front of him. He saw 2 people on the 5th floor hanging out a window looking up to the 6th floor.
But then I, of course, saw the window ledge above him, and there was a rifle resting on the ledge, and he drew it in.
When history happens, there may be no worse feeling for a news photographer than to have an empty camera. Bob Jackson missed his chance to record one of the most famous moments in time. Little did he know he would get a second chance 2 days later.
So my assignment was to go to the police station and photograph the transfer of the prisoner.
Lee Harvey Oswald was under arrest for killing President Kennedy. He was at the police station, about to be taken to the county jail.
So I'm looking through the camera. You know, I must have checked the wind lever half a dozen times to make sure the film was wound, you know.
When history happens, there may be no better feeling for a news photographer than to time your picture perfectly.
And somebody's stepping out from my right, and you know, this guy's getting in my way, and he shoots and I shoot.
Jackson's picture is iconic. Jack Ruby holding the gun up, Oswald impacted by the bullets, screaming in pain. Dallas Police Detective Jim Lavelle reacting to it all. But in the days before digital photography, you really didn't know what you had until you developed your film.
And I held the wet film up to the light, and it looked really good. It looked sharp, but I couldn't be sure how sharp it was till I got a magnifier. But I remember letting out a yell of some sort.
Bob Jackson took thousands of pictures during his career. He started out shooting car races. It's where he honed his profession. He got other pictures of Oswald that day, including an amazing one of him being loaded into an ambulance after getting shot. So many other emotional pictures over time. But one stands out. One earned Bob Jackson a Pulitzer Prize. One is still special 60 years after it was taken. For a news photographer, there may be no better feeling.